forgiven. We're only human, full of emotion. Oh man, don't expect it different. 'Cause we're only doing what we know, and what I know is we only love. And so many souls left dark and cold, never to be told. I have someone to hold, and so many dreams never to see the light. And oh man, what it just seemed like is love is. Oh, but love is. Oh, love is. Love is.
Hi, I'm Troy Williams, the Executive Director of Equality Utah. We are the state's premier advocacy organization for LGBTQ Utahns and their families. Welcome to our Equality Forum. The election in November will have critical consequences for LGBTQ Americans. For those of us who are concerned about the welfare of our community and the most vulnerable among us, it is essential that we are all actively involved in carefully selecting who will lead our state and our country. Last week, we spoke with Republican candidates vying to become the next governor of Utah. This week, we're speaking with Chris Peterson, the Democratic nominee. We are located in the beautiful and sanitized Fat Fish Media Studio, following all of the CDC's social distancing protocols. So now, thank you for tuning in, and let's start our conversation. He is a professor of business law at the University of Utah. He worked as a special advisor in the U.S. Department of Defense, where he helped lead the Pentagon's efforts to protect military service members from predatory lending. He and his wife, Tara, have 3 children. Professor Chris Peterson, welcome to the Equality Forum.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So you are an LGBTQ ally.
I'd like to think so. I'm doing my best. I think that we need to celebrate our differences and our diversity, and that we need to try to fight to have a cosmopolitan, open society. And so I have spent my life trying to grow and learn and be welcoming to people from lots of different perspectives, whether that's ethnic, gender, race, sexual orientation, any of those things. So yeah, I'd like to say I am an ally.
How did you become that? How did your heart and your mind open to others?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I grew up here in Salt Lake City. I grew up on the west side in West Valley City. My mom was disabled when I was growing up, and single parent household. And I'll be candid, we had quite modest means growing up. Yeah. And I think that for me, I learned to see people who were struggling to overcome great challenges as I tried to overcome some of my own, which I think were much more modest than for many. And I learned about hard work, and I learned about treating people with decency early on. And I think that that's one of the key things that makes up my personality. I'm not in this race because I have some great thirst for power or for notoriety. I'm in this race because I am altruistic. I want to see Utah be a Utah that's for everyone and that takes care of not just the well-to-do, but also the people who are struggling and sometimes left behind.
Right.
And that means our LGBTQ plus neighbors and friends and family members need to be treated with dignity and equality.
Okay, excellent. So in the state of Utah, Democrats are the underdog here. For a statewide race, Democrats are the underdog. So what motivated you to run for governor as a Democrat?
Well, you know, starting out, the Democratic Party asked me to do it. And I'll be honest, when they asked me, I laughed at them. You need to go find yourself a senator or maybe the CEO, a woman CEO of a big business or something along those lines. But I do recognize that over time, I've been reasonably successful in my career, and I can advance a policy agenda that is a sensible policy agenda and is actually the right one for the state of Utah. And the reason I decided to run is because I looked around and I saw so many people being left behind, so many people who didn't have access to reliable health care, so many people who felt alone and afraid and not included by our society, and so many people who didn't get a living wage even though they were working multiple jobs. All those issues have become even more acute now that we have a global pandemic and an ensuing financial crisis. So I want to help people. That's why I'm running for governor. I want to try to restore some balance to our state government, have a moderate, progressive a voice in the governor's mansion to try to help steer the state legislature to a more inclusive Utah.
Okay, great. So, I mean, how do you do it then? Like, how do you get your message out to moderates and the biggest party affiliation in the state, which are independents? How do you reach them?
Well, it's a struggle, but we're doing everything we can to try to have a message that resonates. I think that right now there's some real momentum and hope for change in our state. You know, bear in mind that in the past few election cycles, we've had a series of propositions where the state legislature was not acting, but an overwhelming majority of the citizens of the state rose up and voted for better electoral boundaries, voted for expanding Medicaid, voted for providing medical cannabis to people under the supervised care of their physicians. And when the state legislature tried to start taxing food at a higher level, the state rose up and said, no, absolutely not. We're not going to have more taxes on food when we still have hungry children in the state. And you know, I think that some of those folks out there who identify with those propositions, I'm hoping that they're going to see me as a potential alternative to try to move the state forward in a way that's more inclusive.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let's get into some policy issues and some things facing the state. An issue of great alarm to us as a community. We've seen over the past decade, suicide rates for young people spike 141%, according to the CDC. We're not sure of that number, how many identify as LGBT. We don't have the data to show us. So what kind of policies and initiatives would you take on to help reduce the rates of youth suicide in our state?
Well, you know, first and foremost, it starts with acceptance of our differences and recognizing that we need to celebrate our diversity. But beyond that, and signaling that through our leaders in the state, our cultural leaders, our government leaders, we also need to put resources and infrastructure in place to try to make sure that we're taking care of our children. So, you know, in the state of Utah, for the past 20 years, we have been dead last in per pupil funding for our public education system. And now that has implications for whether or not our kids get a first-class education. But a lot of the places where we've trimmed educational budgets are in services that try to take care of people who have a little bit of differences, have some differences. And we need to make sure that not only do we have reasonable class sizes and that we're retaining our most talented teachers who are most likely to be mentors to the kids that may be struggling or left behind or need extra help, we need to make sure we've got some counselors and nursing resources to make sure that we're identifying children who are struggling. On top of that, I'd also add, this connects back to what we've already spoken about with our healthcare challenges. Too many Utahns don't have reliable, consistent access to affordable healthcare, and that also means mental health care. And we need to improve our access. We need to make sure that we continue to fully fund the Medicaid expansion legislation, and make sure that those of us who have more opportunities and more resources are giving back a little bit extra to make sure that the kids who are coming up behind us have the help they need.
Right. Okay. So ostensibly, we have a representative government. Okay. When I look at our state, 50% of our state are women. Okay. But when I look at the legislature, only 24% are women. Other minorities, woefully underrepresented in government, in C-suites, in boardrooms. What kind of policies and positions can you take as governor to really help, raise up minorities and women in our state?
So it's a great question. You know, to your list of challenges, if I could, I'd like to add one more. You know, we have the highest gap in wages between men and women of any state across the country. How is it that a state that prides itself on family values and an inclusive pioneer spirit can be leaving our pioneer sisters behind? We need to make sure that our systems are mentoring women and other ethnic and racial and gender orientation, sexual orientation groups into positions of power. One thing I'll commit to you is that if I'm elected governor, I commit right here and now to have the most diverse executive branch in the history of the state of Utah. Okay. And I realize that I'm, just another white guy. All the white guys that are on the ticket that are going to be getting.
There's a few of them on the ballot.
Yeah,
this year.
I know. And frankly, I'll be candid. I think it's a limitation in what I bring to the table, but it's one that I hope to overcome by being open to change and celebrating diversity.
Well, tell me about your running mate, Karina Brown.
Yeah.
I don't know her, so tell me about her.
Karina Brown is a fantastic person. She got into politics because her mother, who worked her entire life, played by the rules, but still was of modest income and fell in the healthcare gap. She made too much money working hard to qualify for Medicaid, but she also wasn't getting health insurance from her employer, got sick and actually passed away. Oh, and the heartbreak of that is one of the things that led Karina into becoming a public advocate to try to increase access to healthcare. She was one of the original signatories, sponsors of the Medicaid expansion ballot initiative.
Right.
But
awesome.
Isn't it though? I mean, she's really a remarkable person. But in addition to all of that, she also has been an advocate for victims of child abuse. And she's also been a proponent of small business and trying to make sure that our small businesses get protection and are nurtured to try to make sure we've got a vibrant economy with jobs. A lot of people are going to look at Democrats and say, look, these are just Democrats that only care about social issues. I do care about those things too, but you have to bear in mind, I'm a business law professor. I teach about business, I celebrate business, and recognize that we need to have jobs that provide a living wage in order to be successful. And Karina is right there with me. She's a member of the Chamber of Commerce in Cache County and has been on their legislative committee. So that's another reason that I wanted to have her on the ticket. She's also from rural Utah. I'm not just going to have a Salt Lake first approach. I want to make sure that all Utahns are included and that we're, some of the Utahns who are being left behind the most are in rural areas.
That's right.
We need to make sure that we have a vibrant, diverse economy that's functioning well for rural Utah as well.
For sure. Because when we on the left, when we neglect them, when we neglect, poor communities, rural communities, then they are easily enticed by characters like Trump.
Wow.
And it makes, people are kind of astonished about, how Trump could rise to power. We have to look at people who are struggling and suffering in all across the country.
Well, I do agree with that. I realize that today there are still many Utahns who support President Trump and view him as a leader. I have to be candid and say that I don't believe that he is a positive role model for our children. And I get that we have reasonable policy disagreements, and the Republican Party has been pretty good on some things, not so good on other things, in my view. It's okay for us to have those healthy disagreements. Sure. But what I will not be doing in this campaign is calling names, being deceitful, willfully. Everybody makes mistakes. I know I do. I'm going to make more mistakes in the future. But I'm going to go forward with compassion and decency. This race for me is about trying to restore some civility and balance to our government. And I respectfully submit to my Republican friends and neighbors that maybe the President of the United States is not doing a good job on that front. And we need to perhaps have a little more balance on that here at home.
Continue along the lines of economics. Utah businesses are booming. We've got a great economy, yet recruiting talent to Utah is a challenge. I hear this when I speak with CEOs at Silicon Slopes, and they talk to me about they want to bring top LGBT talent, and they want to recruit them and bring them to Utah, but there are these stereotypes that people outside of the state have about us, that we're not welcoming to LGBT people, we're not supportive of women, we're not welcoming to minorities. How do we actually change it tangibly, and then also work on that perception that we're not a sort of welcoming state?
Well, it's a great question. It's one of the things that we struggle with in our state. I think that there are some unfair stereotypes that sometimes Utah has to fight back against. And I think one of the most effective ways that we can do that is by having a bit more balanced government. I think that realistically, Utah is going to remain a largely Republican state into the future for some time. I get that. I understand that. But that being said, a lot of states that are conservative states will, from time to time, elect a reasonable, civility-oriented governor to try to help be a peacemaker in that government.
Anything can happen in 2020.
Well, you never know. That's right. Kentucky has a conservative state that's the home of Mitch McConnell, has a Democratic governor right now. Montana has a Democratic governor. And there's also some precedent for it here in Utah. Our senator, Mitch Romney, was, of course, the governor of Massachusetts before he was, when he still lived in Massachusetts. Obviously a very Democratic state, but they realized that maybe they needed a little bit of balance to try to keep the Democratic Party on the straight and narrow, prevent backroom deals, prevent some of those stereotypes that might be hurtful for Massachusetts from getting out of hand. That's the kind of thing that I could help with here in Utah. I could try to help make sure that we have a balanced, civility-oriented government that's transparent and is moving forward in a reasonable way. It's not the most exciting campaign slogan, but I'm trying to campaign on practical solutions and reasonable government that's in the public interest. And I know that that's not going to, it's not the most exciting thing, but I think it's actually what Utah needs, and it's the kind of thing that I can bring to the state. And hopefully that will make some progress in pushing back on some of those stereotypes and giving confidence to companies to come and invest here in Utah.
So, okay, let's talk about being a Democrat in a red state. Being a Democrat governor in a red state. 80% of the Utah legislature, somewhere around 80%, is Republican, right? So how do you build those relationships with the other side in order to advance, your agenda?
Yeah. Well, first off, civility first. As I've said, I'm going to run a polite campaign that's oriented towards decency and practical solutions. And I think that many of the leaders on the other side of the aisle will recognize that, and over time, by being competent, data-driven, oriented towards expertise and qualifications, I'm going to win them over by being, aggressively competent. That's how I'm going to do it.
All right. Okay. Excellent. We could use some of that in government today. All right. So people are becoming more comfortable, I think, in society writ large with the LGB community. Mm-hmm. All right. But we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that our transgender siblings have a place at the table, that they're part of this forward movement toward equality. And so we've seen a wave of anti-transgender bills sweeping across the nation. They are cruel. They target children. They're often hyperbolic and misrepresent the beauty of that community. Mm-hmm. As governor, would you be willing to actively engage with transgender leaders, with transgender youth and their families, and really learn about their lives and learn about their struggles and how we can help elevate that community?
Yes, of course I would. I mean, look, my whole approach to politics and to policy is to recognize that individuals have differences and that we need to take care of society, give everyone the opportunities they need to be successful and to thrive. And that doesn't stop after the LGB. Right. It also includes the T and the Q and any other group or minority that's being left behind. From the bottom of my heart, I want to have a compassionate government policy. And for the folks that are trans or transitioning or finding, struggling to find their place in this world, I want you to know that I see you and I care about you. And I'm going to want to have reasonable policies that include you in Utah policy and politics.
Awesome. Good, good. Well, so since LGBTQ folks, we are born into every strata of society, right? Every gender, every race, religion, political party. So, we often do care about issues, beyond, our alphabet. And so I'm curious for you, beyond LGBT issues, what are maybe like the two issues that are you're most passionate about and that you want to bring to the table as governor?
Well, I already mentioned one, education, and that relates back to LGBTQ kids. I've already mentioned that I think it's a shame that for so many decades we've had the lowest per pupil funding in the state of Utah for our kids. But beyond that, I also would like to mention that I think we have some serious environmental stewardship problems in our state. And that doesn't mean that we have to go off the deep end and be unreasonable, but it's simply the case that we also have one of the worst air pollution problems in the entire country. On some days, our air pollution rivals some of the worst air pollution metropolitan areas in the entire world. And air pollution it causes serious health conditions, health problems, asthma. It exacerbates deaths in flu season, something that, with the COVID-19 crisis, I think is first and foremost in our mind. It also causes cancer and heart disease. And we can do a better job of decreasing air pollution. Now, we've made some progress in the past. We need to continue that, and we need to buckle down and make more progress, especially as our growing population continues to fill the Wasatch Front and some of our other valleys around the country where most of the Utahns are living. As our valleys keep filling up, this problem is going to get worse and worse unless we get ahead of it. So we need to make sure we're transitioning more quickly to Tier 3 gasoline. We need to transition more quickly to plug-in hybrid and electric vehicles. We need to take more seriously the potential for generation and storage of rooftop solar power. And we've got to get serious about helping our industry control single source emissions from smokestacks.
Excellent.
So those are some of the things I'm going to focus on.
All right, great. Okay, all right, now it is time for your LGBTQ pop quiz. 3 questions, you gotta be ready.
All
okay.
right, I'll do the best I can.
All right, according to the Williams Institute out of UCLA, Provo has the greatest number of same-sex couples raising children in America. True or false?
Well, if you're asking, I guess that might be true, but I would think it would be Salt Lake before Provo. But
Salt Lake City is the right answer.
Salt Lake is the
excellent.
answer. All right,
well
I
done.
guess I got it somehow.
You got it.
Yeah.
You got it. Okay. All right. Your biggest gay political man crush: Derek Kitchen or Pete Buttigieg?
Oh, Derek Kitchen. He's my senator. He's such a decent guy. For those of you at home that don't know Senator Kitchen, he's just so well-spoken and thoughtful and precise. And he dresses really well. I don't know how he does it. I need him to come and help me out.
It's a thing.
But definitely Derek Kitchen. Although Pete Buttigieg is a great guy too, but it's Derek Kitchen.
Excellent. Okay, last question. Have you ever binge watched an entire season of the following shows? Schitt's Creek,
No.
Modern Family,
No.
RuPaul's Drag Race.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know.
Failed the last question. Oh, wow.
I'm a busy guy.
All right, we still like you though.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
All right. Professor Peterson, thank you so much for being on the Equality Forum.
Hey, it's a pleasure. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for letting me compete and for giving me a chance to share my message.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Thanks. Thank you for watching the Equality Forum. I want to thank all of our candidates, as well as Cole Adams and his team at Fat Fish Media for designing and producing this beautiful event. There is nothing more important this year than staying healthy, staying active, and getting out to vote. The primary, again, is June 30th. Now, anyone can vote in the Democratic primary, but only registered Republicans can vote in the GOP primary. You can register at vote.utah.gov. Equality Utah is our state's LGBTQ advocacy organization, and the only way this work is possible is with your financial support. If you've enjoyed tonight's forum, please go to equalityutah.org and make a financial gift. Every dollar helps us advance LGBTQ equality in our state. Thank you, and have a great night.
Love is everlasting, ever living, ever loving, and ever giving.